Joining us right now, Lanny Davis. So excited. Perfect day to have Lanny Davis, crisis management expert. And here we had Christie in the middle of a crisis yesterday, attempting to management. Lanny, I'm going to ask you about that in a minute. But first, I got to ask you what I think is actually a bigger story. I got to ask you about the book that was released by former Secretary of Defense Bob Gates earlier this week. It had some phenomenal revelations, and I want you to listen to how Chuck Todd of NBC News characterized one of the revelations about Hillary Clinton.
This quote is one of the most intriguing of the book. Quote, Hillary, Gates writes, told the president that her opposition to the 2007 surge in Iraq had been political because she was facing him in the Iowa primary. Of course, because the caucuses, but this only reinforces one of the biggest knocks against Hillary Clinton, that she will say and do anything to win.
Lanny Davis, there's been a lot of pushback from the White House with regard to the allegations about Obama and about Biden. Don't hear many people defending Hillary Clinton on this. Would you like to?
Well, first of all, Chuck Todd and a few other people look at 99% complimentary, unbelievable adjectives, descriptions complimenting Hillary Clinton in the book. And what does Chuck Todd spend time on? The 1%, one sentence that is obviously taken out of context. But this is classic.
Well, what's the context?
How do you know it's obviously taken out?
And that's what you identify as this is a major issue.
It's a pretty damning comment, if in fact it's true. Are you privy to what the actual context is?
It's not a damning comment if it's taken out of context. If she's talking about.
Well, how do you know it's taken out of context?
The surge did not have popular support, and a lot of politicians, including Barack Obama.
How do you know, Lanny? Would you turn off his microphone for a minute? Listen, I'm sorry, Lanny, but when I try to ask you a question, you need to let me ask a question. I'm sorry. How do you know that this matter was taken out of context?
Well, I don't know, but I'm saying that the word politics doesn't necessarily mean...
You don't know.
The biggest
you made a statement that it was taken out of context, and you don't know.
Certain pundits about Hillary Clinton. She won every major state primary after New Hampshire. So what knock is he referring to? This is just the silliness of finding 1% out of the 100 comments, and that's the one he focuses on. That's my point. It's out of context.
Well, you said it was obviously out of context, but you also are conceding that you don't know that it was out of context.
Well, I know that the word politics can be misinterpreted by a man who's never been in politics as a bad word, and I interpret it as public support and lack of public support. I also know that what he said about Hillary was very positive, and you didn't hear Chuck Todd saying, all those great things that he said about Hillary, that's really going to help her.
All right.
So this is just Todd. Chuck's a great reporter, great guy, great friend.
But he got this one wrong, yeah. All right, before we ask you about Christie, one other thing, because you were part of a White House that was under fire, and when we see this book come out, I asked Ari Fleischer about this earlier in the week. This was his assessment of this book.
Secretary Gates could have written in his book that he always thought Hillary's opposition to the surge was political, that he didn't think that she really meant what she said. But to quote a verbatim conversation you heard in the front of the president, the damage is now the President of the United States is going to say, who can I trust?
What do you think about this?
I talk freely and frankly with anybody in this office.
Is this a problem for presidents that people in the room are about to, really taking notes for a future book while they're giving him advice?
Sure, it's a problem. I'm sorry that Secretary Gates quoted people when he didn't tell them ahead of time. I'm going to quote people, but a lot of people do that, and it's an unfortunate fact of life. I actually wrote a book, a White House memoir, after I left the Clinton White House, and I absolutely never quoted any conversation where the person who was talking to me wasn't on the record, knowing that it might be someday written. In other words, it was a story that was reported in a newspaper.
I want to talk now about Christie, because as a guy who looks at crisis management issues, it was quite a performance yesterday, you have to say. 107 minutes in front of the reporters, in front of the cameras, answering all questions until there were no more questions. What did you think about the performance, and did he salvage his political reputation?
Well, first of all, I think he did a good job. I kind of like Christie. I'm a Jersey City, New Jersey boy, and there's a lot about Christie that I like. But as a crisis manager, I think he did poorly because he didn't anticipate two big questions that he still hasn't answered. The first is, during that traffic jam, why didn't he ask questions about it? Where was he during that jam? And he knew some of his friends were being at least mentioned in the press as responsible for a so-called traffic study. He should have answered that question yesterday. I blew that. I made a big mistake. I should have been on top of that, and I was indifferent to it. That's number one. Number two, the more important one is, what in God's name did he think he was accomplishing by asking a couple of people, his counsel and his chief of staff, to take 1 hour to interview rather than hiring an independent outside counsel or outside investigator to look at all the emails within his own office and make absolutely sure that no one was involved? That's the question he should have said yesterday. I also blew that. I shouldn't have taken an internal investigation in 1 hour without looking at emails, without doing an outside investigation. So a good crisis management plan anticipates what's coming around the corner, and I think those two questions are still open, and for that reason he didn't do an A job. Maybe I'll give him a B+.
All right, a B+ from Lanny Davis, a very, very hard taskmaster there. Thanks, Lanny. Always good to have you.